Okay, so lesson 2, we're going to have a look at controlling body temperature. So we're going to have a look at behavioural and physiological. Now you can probably remember what behavioural responses are. You can probably name some examples of behavioural responses. Physiological responses might be a little bit more difficult. So we're going to cover that today. We're going to look at what is a physiological response and then have a look at some examples of that. So first of all, what is meant by behavioural? Again, as usual, pause the video, have a little think about that, but you should be able to come up with a reasonable answer. And what is meant by physiological? We've done some physiology. I guess we've mentioned physiology before, but you might not know what physiology is. So physiological is chemical. So the study of physiology is the study of how things work in your body. So this topic is a very physiological topic because we're going to have a look at excretion and homeostasis, and they are physiological, or they involve physiological responses. Excretion is, it would be studied in physiology. So if you did a degree in physiology and anatomy, you would look at where everything is and what they do, how they do their job, how they work. So you would have a look at things like the kidney and the liver, which we're going to have a look at in this topic. So physiology really is how it works, how your body does what it does. And it's actually a really interesting area of biology. So if you are interested in the medical type field, but you're not really sure if medicine's for you, have a look at physiology. Have a look at physiology and anatomy. It's really interesting. I did a whole lot of physiology on my degree, and it's cool. Right, so physiological response would be a chemical response. So vasoconstriction, you've done before, vasoconstriction, vasodilation. Toxin production, we've done, you did it in adaptations. So when you looked at, plants, what was that? Immunology, the immunology. And we looked at plants and toxin production. That would be a physiological response. So the next question, why is temperature regulation important? You should remember that generally from doing the enzymes topic, but you should remember that from last lesson as well, because all of your metabolic reactions are enzyme controlled. Now, metabolism is the word we use for all the chemical reactions that happen in your body. They can be broken into anabolic and catabolic. Anabolic reactions build things. So taking amino acids and building it into a protein is an anabolic reaction. Catabolic reactions do the opposite. They take larger molecules and break them down into smaller molecules. So digestion is an excellent example of a catabolic reaction. So if you look at all the catabolic reactions in the body, all the anabolic reactions in the body, and put them together, that is metabolism. They are your metabolic reactions. So when we talk about metabolic reactions, these are the reactions that happen in your body that just kind of keep you going, keep you alive. And then if you look at metabolic rate, a rate is always a function of time. So metabolic rate is how many of those reactions happen in a specific time frame. Okay? Right, so different ways in which heat can move from one thing to another. So different ways in which heat can be gained or lost. And in today's lesson, we're going to have a look at different types of organism. We're going to have a look at exotherms and endotherms. Now you have this diagram in your book, and what I want you to do is use this information to annotate that diagram. So exothermic reactions, we're going to have a look a bit more closely at the actual definition of exotherm and endotherm. But exothermic reactions are ones that kind of release heat to the environment. There's kind of heat left over. So respiration. Respiration is something we do in order to get energy from glucose. But heat, it's not altogether an efficient system. So heat is lost to the environment. What we do is we harness that heat. We try to keep it so that we can maintain a warm body temperature. Other organisms, like this lizard, don't do that. Yes, heat is produced through respiration, but they don't make any attempt to to keep it lost to the environment. So things that we've looked at before, we looked at this one when we did biological molecules, and we looked at water. So latent heat of vaporization or latent heat of evaporation, it's the same thing. So that's the cooling by evaporation. So sweating is a good example of that. Water loss from a leaf surface, that's a good example of that as well. If you can hear some padding about, that's my dog. He will not lie down. He's got a ball and he wants me to play with him, but I'm in the dining room. I can't play with the ball in the dining room, you stupid dog. Right, so radiation, convection and conduction. You did when you did physics at GCSE. So radiation, the sun does radiation. It's just transmission of heat at the end of the day, when the sun's rays have nicely heated the soil and heated the ground, that radiates back out through the evening and through the night. That's what keeps our nights really nice and warm in the summer. And that's what the greenhouse gases do. They prevent that radiation from escaping back out into space. Convection is the generation of current. When you warm air or you warm water, when you warm them, they get less dense, and so they rise. And so when they get less dense and rise, they push water out of the way. And so what you get is, if you have a container, for example, and you heat it, this warm water rises and it generates a current, because then the colder water sinks, and so what you get is a convection current. Can I draw that in a different colour? A convection current. And it's actually how your radiators work. Your radiators aren't radiators, they're convectors. But anyway, there you go. So that's convection, and then conduction is kind of touch, really. It's how heat is transferred from one thing to another. So, you know, you get cold, you, I don't know, cuddle your dog, and then you get heat from your dog. Oh, you cuddle the radiator. You lot all stand outside my lab and cuddle the radiator. So that's conduction. Right, so let's move on. Right, so this diagram is just showing you the difference between an endotherm and an exotherm. So we are endotherms. We have energy, this heat energy left over that we use to maintain our body temperature. And so that heat is from within. That heat that's used to keep our temperature at that kind of 37 average is from within. Ectotherms, which is, I can't circle this. Oh, that's not working. Will that work? Oh, this isn't working. Why is this not working? These things, the lizard. You can see that that's a lizard. Ectotherms, their temperature is the same temperature as their surroundings. So they get that heat from their surroundings. So that's not to say they don't do any respiration. Obviously they respire, otherwise they wouldn't survive. But they are generally the temperature of their surroundings. So you'll see lizards basking in the sun. It increases their body temperature. Then when they start to overheat a little bit, they'll move into the shade. So they are more dependent on behavioural responses for their temperature. We are more reliant on physiological responses. So, I mean, obviously we do a lot of behavioural responses. You lot walk around constantly in your coats because you don't know what a jumper is. Anyway, let's have a look at them. So these are the definitions of ectotherm, and then endotherm there as well. So ectotherm, ecto meaning outer, therm is obviously heat. So getting the heat from the outside. So it used to be called cold-blooded. You've probably heard things like lizards being referred to as cold-blooded. You cannot use the word cold-blooded in your exam. Okay, so that one is out. However, here's a little trick to remember ecto and endo. Ecto has a C in because they used to be called cold-blooded. That helps you remember which one it is then there you go. Endotherms get their heat from inside, so we are endotherms, we maintain our body temperatures. Birds are endotherms. Ectotherms, you've got all the things. Fish are the temperature of the sea. Now, one thing you should remember about the water is that it's very stable temperature-wise, which is why fish are happy enough to be the same temperature as the water, because it doesn't change very much. It's very stable. So their enzyme-controlled reactions, their kind of physiology is very much adapted to that temperature. Okay, so you need to now, from now on, refer to ectotherm and endotherm, these two terms. You can't use the words cold-blooded or warm-blooded. Okay. Okay, so ectotherms, most animals are ectotherms. Mammals, birds are endotherms. Pretty much everything else is an ectotherm. And like I say, water is a very, very good stable environment. So you get lots of ectotherms in the water. That heat capacity, that specific heat capacity, keeping that temperature very nice and controlled. Land animals are subject to far more fluctuations. So that's where you get a lot more behavioural responses. So like I said, the lizards basking in the sunlight, they're moving into the shade when they start to overheat. The Galapagos Island lizards, you've possibly seen those before. They bask in the sunlight to raise their body temperature really quite high, higher than they would normally want to, so that when they go into the sea, they dive down to the rocks and they eat the algae on the rocks at the bottom, and their temperature plummets because that water is really very cold surrounding Galapagos Islands. So those lizards raise their temperature higher than normal so that they can last longer in the water. It's really quite cool. So there's a really good example of a behavioural adaptation leading them to be able to kind of live a very specific kind of lifestyle. They have quite a niche, and you'll learn what a niche is when you do the ecosystems topic. Right. Okay, was I going to say anything else about that? Well, energy requirements. Being an ectotherm, you don't have as high energy requirements because you're not trying to maintain your own body temperature. So you don't have to eat quite as much. Now that's good for survival because it means you don't have to eat as much. However, ectotherms are a bit slower off the mark. You look at a lizard first thing on the morning before the sun's come up and it's basked for a little bit. They're very sluggish, they are very, very slow. So they're much more susceptible to predation. So they have to be very, very careful about keeping themselves kind of camouflaged or keeping themselves out of harm's way until they've warmed up enough to actually be able to move quickly. So there are advantages and disadvantages to being ectotherms and endotherms. Endotherms, yes, we can respond far more quickly. We don't have to wait until we've warmed up, but we also have to eat far more. We need more calories because we need to, we have higher metabolic demands. We respire more in order to generate that heat. Well, in order to sometimes generate that heat. Remember, shivering is rapid contraction and relaxation of muscles because that requires respiration, and that respiration releases heat. So yes, shivering is contraction and relaxation of muscles, but it's so that you get the heat from respiration. That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to generate heat, and the way to generate heat is through respiration. The way to maintain that heat is to have those thick fat layers, to be hairy, all of those adaptations that you've looked at before to maintain that heat. But generating that heat is through respiration. And so we need to eat more. We'll go through more calories to do that. And even if you're not aware of actually shivering, you will still be respiring to generate heat to do that, as well as obviously the energy. Right, now you'll notice when you have a look at this resource on the Google Classroom, it's not actually a card sort. Even if you had this in the classroom, it wasn't ever actually cut up into a card sort. So there is a sheet and you can use it to fill in the table in your booklet. Okay, I mean, you couldn't do the card sort anyway, perhaps. You'd have to have printed it out and cut it out. That would be a bit of a waste, but there you go. So the information sheet is on the Google Classroom. I loaded that up on Sunday, I think, whatever day. Right, so endotherms, heat from within, so behavioural and physiological responses. So you can have a look at those on that card as well. Now, as I've talked about, shivering is a very good physiological response to generate that heat. Behavioural adaptations, behavioural responses, you've got the usual. You can open and close windows, you can put a jumper on, you can take a jumper off, all those kinds of things. And don't obviously just think about humans, animals. If anybody has a pet, I know my mum's cats used to sit in the windowsill until they got very nice and hot, and then they'd go and stretch out on the cool kitchen floor. So they are all behavioural responses. Okay, physiological responses. You've got vasoconstriction, vasodilation. So physiological responses in terms of temperature we're talking about here. So yeah, you've got vasodilation, vasoconstriction, shivering, that contraction of the muscles, the erection of the hairs on your skin. When you've got little muscles called erector pili muscles, and when they contract, they erect the hairs on your skin, and that's to trap a layer of air. Now, clearly for humans, we are no longer very hairy, and so it's not a great response for us. But you look at birds first thing on a morning, and you have plenty of time to go and do that now. So get yourself up, see the birds before it gets really nice and warm. So sometime probably before 10, and you'll see it brilliantly on a winter's morning. Oh, it's fantastic. And you'll watch these birds, and they really fluff up their feathers. They really push themselves out. You look at something like a sparrow or a little blue tit, they suddenly become kind of twice their size. And what they're doing is fluffing up those feathers to trap air. And that air kind of warms up. And air is a very poor conductor. So what that does is it stops that heat from escaping. So it helps to keep them nice and warm. So that's why birds sit there fluffing themselves up. It's lovely. Try and find it. Try and see it. And if you see it, send me a little video clip, because it brightens my day. It's just lovely. Right, so vasoconstriction, vasodilation. You have done this before, but at GCSE, everybody does it very badly, and then at A-level, people still do it badly. So let's have a look at the anatomy of the skin here. So you've got an arteriole. That's what that thing is. This is a capillary network. Now, the arteriole serves the capillary network. Blood goes from the arteriole into the capillaries, and then from the capillaries it will go back into a venule, or back in, actually usually this way, so yeah, anyway, whatever, and then we'll move away from the capillary network. Now, please remember, these capillaries cannot move. They do not move. They have no muscle, so they cannot dilate or constrict. Capillaries cannot move, they have no muscle, they cannot constrict or dilate. Arterioles, however, arterioles do. They have muscle, they can constrict, they can dilate. They cannot move, nothing can move. Okay, so if you want to get rid of excess heat, remember as the blood passes organs and tissues, the heat is transferred to the blood, and the heat is carried in the blood. Now, if you want to get rid of excess heat, the only way to do that is through the skin's surface. Now, these capillary networks are right under the surface of the skin. Okay, they run through the skin layers. So if you want to lose more heat, you want more blood running through those capillaries. And the way you do that is, if you see here, that is a sphincter muscle. Now, a sphincter muscle is kind of round and constricts inwards to reduce the lumen. Okay, so if you want more blood flowing in these capillaries, what you do is dilate that sphincter. So instead of being that kind of size, it becomes that kind of size. So you dilate that sphincter, and so you have more blood running through these capillaries, and so you can lose more heat through radiation, conduction, whatever. Okay. Now, if you are cold, what you want to do is you want to constrict that sphincter muscle, like here, you constrict it. Now, you have less blood moving through those capillaries. You cannot say no blood, otherwise your skin tissues would die. You can't live without blood. That's what delivers the oxygen and the glucose. So less blood is flowing through those capillaries. More blood is diverted through this thing here, which is called a shunt vessel. You're shunting the blood away from those capillaries. So more blood is running through that shunt vessel, less blood is running through this capillary network, and so less blood is lost, less heat is lost through conduction and convection. Okay, so on the next slide we have that in words. You need to get that down into your book, and I have highlighted certain things for you. So when arterioles dilate, not capillaries, arterioles dilate, sphincter muscles open, more blood flows through the capillaries in the skin, so more heat is lost through radiation or conduction or whatever. Now, you must use the word more. It is vitally important to use the word more, because this is a change. Anytime you have a change from the normal, you need to use an word. You need to use a comparative word. And I know more doesn't end in ER, but greater, lesser, higher, lower, they're all words. You need comparative language. Now, can I actually write comparative language here? Still can't find one of those little pen things, so this is still, no I can't. Comparative. I used to have one of those little stylus things for this, but I can't find it, so I'm using my finger. Anyway, so you need comparative language to show that this has changed. So more blood flowing through the surface than normal. More heat lost because you have this excess of heat. Okay? When the sphincter muscles and the arterioles constrict, more blood is diverted through that shunt vessel. If you forget this bit, it's not so important, but you want the arterioles to constrict, you want less blood flowing to the capillaries, less heat lost through the skin surface. Okay? It's vital that you use that language, and it's not difficult language. And it's the same for any time you are showing that there has been a change. Okay? Any time. You must, and you'll see mark schemes usually say use of more once, use of less once. Okay? So you don't have to use it for everything, but you do have to show that this has changed. Right, so you need to get that back, that into your book somewhere. I can't remember what page it's on. Right, so you don't need to know this, but I just thought I'd show you some skin because we don't actually generally study it. So it has a lot of adaptations to try and kind of maintain our heat. So you can see we've got these fatty deposits in our skin. We've got these capillary beds running through that surface. That's where you're going to get that loss of heat. You can see this thing here, that's that erector pili muscle that I was talking about. And when you contract that, you erect the hair. When you relax it, the hairs kind of fall more on the skin. You can see we've got a sweat gland here so that you can release that sweat which evaporates from the surface of the skin, taking that excess energy, heat energy with it. You can see you've got oil glands there. That sebum is the oil that is on your skin, and it's waterproof. It helps to waterproof you. It's why you don't just dissolve in the shower. So there you go. That's the anatomy of the skin. It's actually really quite interesting. Anyway, I think that's it for this presentation. So make sure you get that down. The standard assessment task, I copied the questions into a Google Doc so that you can submit your answers to me online. Please remember to make a copy of that document. Title it with your full name, please, your first name and your surname. If your surname's incredibly long, you can just use the first letter. That's all I need really, just unless you know of somebody else with your name in the year group or your same initial. Whatever, anyway, please make yourself identifiable. Okay. Oh, no, that's not quite it. Sorry. Right, thermoregulatory centre in the hypothalamus. We talked about it at GCSE as well. So this is an area of the brain, and you're going to study the brain a little bit next year. Certainly you're going to have a look at where the hypothalamus is. So the thermoregulatory centre is where temperature is detected and then where responses are sent from. So peripheral receptors are ones around the edge of your body. So your skin would be a peripheral receptor. So the periphery of a field is the edge of a field. Your peripheral vision is the edge of your vision. So peripheral receptors, the ones in your skin, they send information to the brain. So you know what the temperature is happening kind of in the atmosphere, okay, in the room that you're sat in. Your skin is the first one to detect that slight drop in temperature or that slight rise in temperature. So they're going to be the first ones that detect that cooling first. Now, that's really important because you have core temperature receptors, you have temperature receptors, so your brain is detecting temperature as the blood flows through. You have temperature receptors in some of the major arteries in your aorta and stuff like that. And so you can detect the core temperature as well, and that's very, very important because you don't want your core temperature to drop. You don't want your core temperature to fluctuate. Your peripheral temperature, your fingers, you'll know in the winter, they get really very cold. Your ears, your nose sometimes can feel like they're about to drop off. They're so cold. And your body will immediately start to work to counter that drop in temperature because it does not want your core temperature to drop. If you were only detecting changes in your core temperature, then the second you've got a slight drop, it's going to be much harder for your body to rectify that. You're going to have much more severe responses, much more exaggerated responses to counter that. So your body wants to keep that little seesaw very, very, very balanced. It wants to react to very small changes because it makes it more efficient, it makes it easier to change. Right, so this is a feedback loop, just like we looked at in the last one. So there's your normal body temperature. If your temperature detects a rise, that rise is detected by your thermoregulatory centre in your hypothalamus. So it will send out signals to your, or impulses to your sweat glands. So you're going to increase the sweating, you're going to get vasodilation, you're going to lose more heat to the surroundings, and your temperature comes back to normal. And then again, if your temperature drops below normal, you've kind of got two different things you can do here as well. Well, actually three different things. You can vasoconstrict to reduce that blood flow to the skin. You can reduce sweating. You can say stop sweating, but actually generally you don't ever really stop sweating. Your armpits are generally warm enough to keep sweating. But certainly you've got reduced sweating. You won't be sweating kind of, you know, on the surface of your arms or something. And that's going to help to conserve body heat. Also, you're then going to have shivering. So this involuntary contraction of muscles, that's what shivering is. And that shivering generates heat through respiration. They are all going to help to bring your temperature back up to normal. So that is all detected by the hypothalamus there. Okay. Right, so the standard assessment task, as it says there, past paper question 1 is identical. So please save that for your revision so you can test yourself again. But like I said, the standard assessment task, please submit it via the Google document, and then I can mark it for you online and I can send it back to you. Okay.